Shalom and welcome to Temple Talk. This is Yitzhak Reuven speaking to you from south of Jerusalem, here in beautiful, holy, sacred, majestic land of Israel. Today is the 10th day of the month of Nisan, 5785. It's April 8th, 2025. This coming Shabbat, Shabbat Hagadol, the Great Sabbath. We read Parshat Tzav, second Parsha, the second Torah reading from the book of Leviticus, which begins in Leviticus chapter 6, verse 1, concludes chapter 8, verse 36. And, of course, we are rapidly approaching Passover, Pesach in Hebrew. Pesach, from the word to skip over, just like Passover. To skip over because, of course, HaShem skipped over the houses of the children of Israel who had marked their doorposts, their door jambs, their lintels with the blood of the lamb of the Passover offering, thus sparing their firstborn and opening the doors really for them to leave Egypt. So it's a very exciting time of the year, and it's a very exhausting time of the year because we are all getting ready for Passover, which means cleaning up the Chametz, the leavened bread, leavening agents, anything that has any kind of leavening in it, we have to get rid of. We are not allowed, as we're told by the Torah in Exodus chapter 12 and other places, that we are not allowed to have any leaven on our property. Not only are we not allowed to eat it, but not to have it on our property, so we have to get rid of it. So that involves a lot of cleaning, a lot of using up what we can use up, and in some cases we simply have to destroy what we can't use up. And of course this involves scouring the house, especially of course the kitchen and the eating areas where any crumb of bread, for example, is forbidden. So we have to make sure that we do a thorough cleaning. This may be the origin of spring cleaning. It very well may be, because Passover itself is some 3,500, 3,600 years old, because that's when our ancestors first left Egypt, on the eve of that first Passover, the first Seder meal, which we relive every year, as we've been doing for, like I said, some 3,600 years. We relive our exodus from Egypt every year, and it's not simply remembering it. We are commanded to relive it and to teach it to our children in the first person. I left Egypt. God took me out of Egypt. God delivered me. God did it for me. God did it for us. So we have to imagine ourselves leaving Egypt ourselves and convey that immediacy to our children, because it is, again, one of the major commandments, one of the major responsibilities and commitments of Passover, of the Seder night, and that is to teach our children the Haggadah, the text that we read from, and not only read from, we discuss and we interpret and we argue about it, and we can add to it and we can see it in different ways, but it is the text that brings us all together. And from that we teach our children and ourselves, as a matter of fact. We teach ourselves again, but we teach our children and grandchildren. And if we have no children in the house, we teach one another. And if a person is alone, he asks himself the 4 questions, the famous 4 questions, and he answers the famous 4 questions, because you have to teach it. And even if you're the only one in the household, and hopefully you're not, hopefully you're with friends or family or neighbors, but even if you are, for some reason, you are the teacher and you are also the student. It is an obligation, and nothing, no situation releases us from fulfilling that obligation, just like eating matzot and not any leavened bread. The matzot is only obligated on the first night of Passover. We eat matzot through all 7 days because we don't eat bread, but we're only obligated to eat it on the first night. And of course the major obligation, which unfortunately and tragically we're not observing today, and haven't for some nearly 2,000 years. That is the Korban Pesach, the Passover offering, which we are all actually obligated, even under today's conditions. Halakhically, as far as Jewish law is concerned, we are not released from offering the Passover offering even today, because we do have access to the Temple Mount, and we could actually build, at the very least, a temporary altar. In fact, the Temple Institute has an altar in our exhibit, a small altar, but halachically acceptable and in the proper proportions, that could be disassembled and reassembled quickly on the Temple Mount for an offering. Even if it were a single Korban Pesach, a single offering, it would make a huge deal in the world, not just in the Jewish world, but in the world. And again, all we need is a green light from our government, the Israeli government, to say, okay, we are going to make sure the Temple Mount is secure for this occasion. And again, people say, oh, that's like so far-fetched, it's so out of the question. You know what? We just concluded the Muslim month of Ramadan. The final 10 days or so of that month and its closing celebrations, Jews were not allowed on the Temple Mount. Why? Because it was a Muslim holiday, and the Israeli authorities for years always have granted exclusivity of the Temple Mount on those days for the Muslims to celebrate. So there's absolutely no reason under the sun why the Israeli government couldn't grant exclusivity for the Jewish people on even a single day, not to mention the entire 7 days of Passover, where it's an obligation, a Torah obligation to go to the place of the Holy Temple, at least for that one day. And there's an area where the altar would go. There's nothing built there. A temporary altar could go precisely in that location without disturbing anything or anyone. The offering could be made, even, again, if it were a single offering, it could be made even if we don't have the para aduma, the red heifer, and we're not ritually pure, and from the highest in the highest level of purity. In a case like that, Torah says explicitly that when the majority of Israel is not pure, has not been purified by the red heifer, you can make your Passover offering anyway. So there's absolutely nothing halachically, nothing biblical to stop us today from performing the Passover offering. The only thing that's stopping us is the Israeli government, and I'm not saying it's a bad thing about the Israeli government. The Israeli government has obviously its political and security considerations, but I think that with a sustained effort at discussion and explaining and discussing it with people of different faiths, I think that we could probably very easily arrive at an agreement. There wouldn't be any disturbances. It could be done. And I think it would be a huge blessing for the entire world. Okay. That's what I have to say about the Korban Pesach today. This coming Shabbat, as I said, we read Parshat Tzav, the second Parsha, the second Torah reading of the book of Vayikra, Leviticus. And again, it's the continuation of what we were discussing last week, which are offerings. And in the second half of the Parsha, it focuses on the inaugural ceremonies of sanctifying Aaron and his sons before the actual inauguration of the tabernacle, which, of course, did take place on the first day of Nisan. Today is the 10th of Nisan, so imagine 10 days ago, some 3,600 years ago, was the inauguration of the tabernacle. And of course, next week we read Parshat Shmini, which is that fateful Parsha which discusses the inauguration, the beautiful celebration, the appearance of Hashem's kavod, his Shekhinah, his presence, and then the tragic deaths. Spoiler alert: tragic deaths of Nadav and Avihu, the oldest sons of of Aaron. So this is leading up to that. So on the one hand, there's a lot of technical stuff in the book of Leviticus. I heard someone recently say, there's no storyline in Leviticus. Well, there is a storyline. It's the inauguration of the tabernacle, and then there are other bits and pieces throughout Leviticus. But other than that, yes, it is the explanation of the obligations, the responsibilities of the Kohanim inside the tabernacle and also outside, when we discuss things such as tzarat, skin ailment, skin affliction, and other impurities. The responsibilities of the Kohanim take them outside of the tabernacle. So we're not going to talk really much about Parshat Tzav, this temple talk, because there's so much to talk about Passover. Let's just read, though, the first few verses, as we always do in Hebrew than in English. And by the way, these first few verses, we've been posting them on our Facebook page because they are very relevant to basically it's describing what would become the daily responsibilities of the Kohanim, of the temple priests in the tabernacle and the temple. And we have posted them with our beautiful Temple Institute paintings, which depict what these verses are actually talking about. So let's read the first few verses from the book of Leviticus, chapter 6, verse 1. Vayedaber HaShem el Moshe lemor tzav, which means command. Tzav et Aharon ve'et banav lemor zot Torat ha'olah, hi ha'olah al mukta al hamizbeach kol halayla ad haboker ve'esh hamizbeach tukad bo. ולבש הכהן מדובר ומכנס איבר, ילבש הבשרו והרים את הדשן אשר תאכל האש את העולה על המזבח, ושמו אצל המזבח, ופשט את בגדיו ולבש בגדים אחרים, והוציא את הדשן אל מחוץ למחנה, אל מקום טהור. והאש על המזבח תוקד בו, לא תכבה, וער עליה הכהן עצים בבוקר וערך עליה העולה והקטיר עליה חלבי השלמים, אש תמיד תוקר על המזבח לא תכבה. Hashem spoke to Moshe, saying, command Aaron and his son, saying, this is the law of the burnt offering. It is the burnt offering that stays on the flame on the altar all night until the morning, and the fire of the altar should be kept aflame on it. Yes, the offerings, took a long time for certain offerings to be completed, for them to be burnt off. So they were on, even though the active service of the temple always ended at sundown, the fires of the altar were kept burning, and whatever was still on the altar was kept burning all throughout the night. And the next morning, one of the very first responsibilities of the Kohanim, after waking and inspecting the courtyard to make sure everything was in tip-top condition, and of course going to the mikveh if they needed to, and then dressing, which is mentioned right here. They need to put on their big day kuna, their priestly garments, and the first obligation is one Kohen goes out and he sanctifies his hands and feet in the copper laver, the water of the copper laver, and then he sends the altar, the mizbeach, and with a silver shovel he cleans off all the ashes and he brings them down to a spot beside the altar. Later on they will be brought outside of the encampment and outside of the Temple Mount ultimately later in the service of the day. So that's what it's describing right here in Parshat Tzav. And again, we have posted a few posts already on Facebook this week which beautifully illustrate what this is talking about. So let's take a break right now from Parshat Tzav, and let's go back to Passover. The Shabbat which precedes Passover, and this year it immediately precedes Passover because Passover begins Motzei Shabbat, Saturday evening at the conclusion of Shabbat. We'll talk about that and all that means in just a moment. But this Shabbat is always referred to as Shabbat Hagadol, the Great Sabbath. And why is it called Shabbat Hagadol? Well, there's usually three basic reasons given. One is because of the great miracles that happened on this day to our ancestors. again, let's go back 3,600 years in Egypt, and HaShem has told Moshe to command Israel, each household on the 10th of Nisan, to acquire a lamb that they will slaughter. And this is all, you can read about it in Exodus chapter 12. And of course we know that the lamb was considered a sacred animal, a god, a deity by the Egyptians. So when the Israelites went out to acquire a lamb, the Egyptians said, well, what are you doing with that lamb? And they said, we're going to slaughter it on the 14th. And of course the Egyptians were aghast. They were stupefied. They were enraged. But they didn't stop the Israelites. They didn't attack them. They didn't harm them. It was a miracle. That in itself is miraculous, that Israel did this brazen act. And sometimes, as we know, the more brazen you are, the safer you're going to be, because you leave your enemies totally bewildered, befuddled, stupefied, mortified, and they don't know what to do. But in any case, we consider it to be a nes gadol, a great miracle. So that's one reason why, perhaps why, Shabbat HaGadol is referred to as Shabbat HaGadol, because that 10th day of Nisan, on that, when Israel was in Egypt and did their first Korban Pesach, was actually a Shabbat. It was actually Shabbat when Israel had to go out and acquire a lamb. So yes, the Shabbat before Passover is basically the anniversary of that initial acquisition by the Israelites of their Passover lambs. The second reason is simply that traditionally rabbis and sages will give long talks on Shabbat preceding Passover, oftentimes dealing with halachic issues, dealing with technical issues of how to do the Seder, how to properly observe Pesach. In fact, we're told that we begin learning about Pesach a month in advance, meaning the minute we finish celebrating Purim, we already begin studying about the laws of Passover, because there's so much to learn. It's by far the most involved, technical, detailed holiday of all our holidays. So the rabbi always has a green light on the Shabbat preceding Passover to either talk about technical things or simply about the ethical, moral, historical lessons of Passover. The third reason is because we always read on Shabbat HaGadol a special Haftarah reading. If you recall, the Haftarah is the additional reading from the prophets that we read every Shabbat. And there's a certain reading that's connected to each of the Torah readings throughout the year, but on Shabbat HaGadol we read this special, and that's from the book of Malachi. I guess you say it in Hebrew, Malachi. Malachi, we say in Hebrew. And it is from the book of Malachi, chapter 3, verse 4 to verse 24. And the final verses say, verse 23 and 24, we read, "Lo, I will send you Elijah the prophet before the coming of the great and awesome day of the Lord, Hayom Yom HaShem HaGadol v'Hanorah, that he may turn the heart of the fathers back to the children, and the heart of the children back to their fathers, lest I come and smite the earth with other destruction." So it is talking about the final redemption, the coming of Moshiach, because Elijah, Eliyahu, will accompany the Moshiach to Jerusalem to announce that he has arrived. And so we read this on Passover because Passover was our first great redemption. And as we know, Nisan is considered the Chodesh HaGeula, the month of redemption, because it commemorates not only the redemption from Egypt, but also the final ultimate redemption. And so this word Gadol, which we just read, is symbolic of everything, kind of covers everything. The greatness of the day, the greatness of the time, the moment, and what it portends for us. There's so much at stake. There's so much at stake, and a key link, and maybe the link between the past and the future, between the redemption in Egypt and our future redemption, is the observance of Passover, the Passover Seder, as I said, the teaching of our children. Because if our children, if they don't learn from us, if they don't hear from us, then there's no one to carry on. They don't have the ability to teach their children if we haven't taught them. So it is extremely important. It's the utmost importance. It's what it's all about. We are all links in a great generational chain. And as we know, a chain is always only as strong as its weakest link. So we need to be strong. We don't want to be that weakest link. We need to observe. We need to learn. We need to teach. We need to convey and pass on to our children everything that we can. And really, in order to do that, we, as I said before, we are obliged. We have to make every effort to really place ourselves as we actually were in a different lifetime in Egypt, leaving Egypt. And we have to bring that back to the surface so that we can share it. So that is Shabbat Hagadol. Now this year, as I mentioned before, Shabbat also precedes immediately Passover. So on Shabbat, we're not allowed to make any preparations, of course, for anything after Passover. So everything has to be ready for Passover before Shabbat, meaning the house has to be completely cleaned. We have to do our bdikat Chametz, our inspection for any last crumbs of Chametz. On Thursday evening, bior Chametz, the destruction of the last bits of Chametz in our possession on Friday morning. And then basically everything, our plates, our tables, our silverware, everything, our pots and pans, our kitchen, everything has to be already ready, kosher, for Pesach. But we still have an obligation to have our chalot, our 2 loaves of chalot on Shabbat, to commemorate the double portion of manna that we received in the desert as part of the teaching of what Shabbat is all about, if we recall from the book of Exodus. So what do? That has to be, it can't be matzah, because we're not allowed to eat matzah on the eve of Passover. So we have to have chalot, some kind of bread, some kind of chametz, in order to make a blessing over Friday evening and also on Shabbat morning for those 2 meals. And yet, we're from early in the morning or mid-morning on Shabbat, the day before Passover, we're not allowed to eat any more chametz. So we have to, begin our morning or afternoon meal on Shabbat mid-morning, make the blessing, make the motzi over the chalot. In many cases, people will have a pita because it's easy, it's small, and it's not crumbly. You can eat it outside, so you don't have crumbs possibly in your house, and you have to finish it up or destroy what's left because you can't have it in your possession. And there's all different types of ways of making rolls out of matzah meal that's not matzah, but it's bread, but it's not chametz. It gets to be very technical sort of workarounds. But in any case, we're obliged to eat those chalot, and we're obliged to have them early. So a lot of people will be getting up very early on Shabbat for the morning prayers, so they can go home and have their first meal early. And then, of course, the upside of all this is that you have the rest of the afternoon to rest. So you can enter into the Seder evening well-rested, which is usually not the case because you're usually working very, 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 very hard right until the last moment. But, of course, on Shabbat we're not allowed to, so you will have a chance to rest. And hopefully we'll all have a very blessed, beautiful Passover Seder. And in temple times, as we know, the Korban Pesach, the Passover offering, also has to be offered on the eve of the 15th. And there's a few hours in the afternoon when the offering would be brought to the Mikdash, to the temple. And even on Shabbat, people are obliged to bring their lambs to the temple for it to be slaughtered they would take the slaughtering knife and they would tuck it into the wool of the lamb over its forehead to carry it, because they weren't allowed to carry it on Shabbat. And after the shechita, after the slaughtering of the lamb and the pouring of its blood on the altar, obligations on the Temple Mount, on every Erev Pesach, every Passover Eve, on Shabbat Passover Eve, they would stay there. They would not leave the Temple Mount on Shabbat until the close of Shabbat, when they would go home with their Passover offering. Not go home, they would go to where they were residing for the week in Jerusalem, and they had big outdoor ovens where they would roast, had to be roasted, the Passover offering on a spit. And so there are certain things that have to be observed, especially when the offering was made on a Shabbat. So as I said before, there's so much to be aware of on Passover, halachically, and it's always a challenge, and there's always something new that you learn, and there's always something that you thought you knew that you didn't. It was you had it wrong. We're not perfect, but we are obliged to do our very, very best. And finally, when we do that final bior chametz, which is the destruction of the last chametz in our possession, and we usually keep a little piece of chametz, a little piece of bread, and make a blessing and throw it into a fire, literally to burn the chametz, the final piece. But we also say something which says that everything that might be in our possession that we're not aware of, there might be a crumb in a corner that we didn't catch. It's like the dust of the earth. As far as we're concerned, it's no longer chametz, it's no longer leavening, it's no longer a breadcrumb. So ultimately, we do our very, 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 very best. And then we just say, listen, if there's anything that we didn't get, as far as I'm concerned, it's dust. And that's how we completely fulfill our obligation to rid ourselves for the week of any chametz, any bread or anything leavened, a breadcrumb, anything, pasta, doesn't matter. Anything that has any kind of leavening has to be gone out of the house. And that's how we do it. Today, the Temple Institute and I believe in cooperation with other elements, is conducting in Jerusalem a reenactment of the Passover offering. Today is actually the 10th of the month, so today was actually the day that in Egypt the Jews acquired the lamb. Today is this targil, this reenactment is happening, a teaching for the public, which will be accompanied by the singing of the Makelat Levi'im, the Temple Institute's Levitical choir, which has become very active, and they're a beautiful choir, and we will be releasing in the fairly near future a few videos. We talked with Rav Menachem Rosenthal, who is he's the initiator and the head of the Levitical choir. He himself is a Levite, and he himself sings in the choir. And we talk with him about a number of things, beautiful, beautiful teachings he gives, and we will be releasing those videos as soon as they are fully edited in the near future. So be looking forward to that, and hopefully today we'll get some good pictures or footage of today's events, and we will share them on our social media, which of course includes Facebook and YouTube and Twitter, X, and Instagram, and of course our website, templeinstitute.org. I remind everyone that we are still in the midst of our Teruma 2025 campaign, where we are exhorting all our followers, all people who are interested, all people who want to be part of the great events that are happening in our world today. And by those great events, I mean the fulfillment of prophecy. And one of those prophetic promises is, of course, the rebuilding of the Holy Temple, which is what the Temple Institute is dedicated toward, however you want to say it. And so we are asking everybody who feels that they have a stake in this, that they want to be a part of this, that they want to support our work, our efforts, to please donate according to your ability to the Temple Institute. We have had wonderful, wonderful response this year. And a lot of new people, a lot of old friends and new friends. And personally, I think it is a great thing to be part of, because it's investing in a promise, investing in a brighter future, a future where all mankind will unite as equals, and we shall unite in those courtyards of the Holy Temple, which, as the prophet Isaiah says, shall be called a house of prayer for all nations, right? I remind everybody that the Mikdash, the Holy Temple, is not a Jewish temple. It's not a big Jewish synagogue. It was from the very beginning meant to be a Mikdash, a temple, a gathering place for all mankind, for people of all faiths, to gather together before HaShem in His presence, and to show our appreciation and our gratitude toward HaShem. King Solomon, in the inauguration of the first Holy Temple, which you can read in the Book of Kings, that's exactly what he described. And of course, our prophets describe it for the future temple. And of course, in the second temple, it was a well-known fact that people of all nationalities and faiths did come to the Holy Temple and partook of the unity, of the beauty that existed in the Holy Temple. We are coming close to the conclusion of today's Temple Talk, and I just want to once again, before I once again focus on Passover, I start to talk about making a contribution, a donation to the Temple Institute. If you are so inclined, you can go to our website, templeinstitute.org. To our donate page, you'll see a link to it in the top right corner of every page on the website, and you can make your donation. It is tremendously appreciated. Must stress that you are our support system. We don't get grants, not from the Israeli government, not from the United States government, not from USAID, not from anyone but you. And I think that's the way it should be, because the Holy Temple is meant to be a temple built by the people to honor Hashem. So we're not looking for government grants. We don't need to play politics. We are above politics. We just want what I think Hashem wants, what we all believe Hashem wants, and what we certainly want, and what I hope someday that the entire world will see eye to eye and say, this is what we want, this is what we need to do. Once again, this coming Saturday evening, Motzei Shabbat, is the first night of Passover, meaning that the final and seventh night will be the following Shabbat. And of course, Jews in the diaspora who celebrate an extra day will, of course, their second day will be the following Sunday as well. But as the music is going to begin any moment now, I just want to wish everybody, absolutely everybody, a blessed Passover. Have a wonderful Seder, and may we all taste the beautiful taste of freedom and liberation and redemption. May God bless us all with all those wonderful blessings. And I thank you once again for being with me on Temple Talk on this Erev Pesach, this Passover Eve, 5785, 2025. Thank you, Temple Talk.